Right, it is 6:36 and this meeting will come to order. Welcome to the April 28th, 2022 meeting of the Twin Cities German Immersion School Board of Directors. We'll begin with a roll call conducted by myself because our board assistant is out sick tonight and we miss Yulia greatly. Director Albers? Here. Director Alcatude here. Director Bell? I think Director Bell is on the Zoom. Are you there?
Do you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. I'm
Thank
here.
you. Director Dayton? Here. Director Abraham?
Here.
Director Hyde?
Here.
Director Iwan?
Yeah, here.
Director Kritzenga?
Yeah.
Director Linnell? She will be calling in a little
Yes.
later. Oh, she'll be calling in a little later. And Director Müller?
Yes.
And Director Ruth Justvig may be calling in, but not yet. Okay. And our ex officio member, Executive Director Christensen. Thanks. All right, when we convene as a board, we open with the school's mission, vision, and values. The mission of the Twin Cities German Immersion School is the innovative education of the whole child through German immersion. Our vision is andere hören, andere sehen, weltoffen denken and handeln. And our selected values are curiosity, kindness, challenge and support, intercultural engagement, and community. And we also welcome those attending this public meeting tonight and thank you for being here. And we give a special greeting and welcome to the candidates for the board of directors. We have Kirsten Reich in the room with us tonight. Thanks for joining us. And I see Wandy is online. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Sure. Thanks very much.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yep. Good to see everyone as well.
All right. Yesterday evening, at the beginning of Holocaust Remembrance Day, the school hosted a very meaningful event called the Transfer of Memory. As I drove to school with my 11 and my 8-year-old children, my 11-year-old and 8-year-old children, I tried to explain why the photo display in their school's atrium had that name, the Transfer of Memory, saying that it was important for young people like them to learn from those who experienced something that should never happen again. I was extremely grateful for the program last night. I was grateful for my children to be in the same room as a Holocaust survivor and surrounded by pictures of survivors and their stories. I read some of the stories to my daughter and could see her processing what she heard as she looked at the grandma or grandpa in the portrait. Today, we heard from the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, Steve Hunigs, who was there last night. He wrote a note to the school today, which said in part, "It was an evocative moment to look into the crowded room and see dozens of welcoming students, parents, and teachers. The energy and desire to learn was palpable. Among many things, thank you to the TCGIS community for raising a cohort of well-prepared and engaged students. The school is living its mission and DEI statements." What an honor for TCGIS to host this exhibit, and what a remarkable opportunity for our children to learn in such an impactful way. Thank you to Dr. Tabish and Dr. Christensen for bringing this to our school, and thank you to all the staff and volunteers who helped make the event happen for our community. Since the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council referenced our diversity, equity, and belonging statement, I'd like to read an excerpt from it tonight. "We recognize that the German language has an undeniable connection to the Holocaust and are committed to learning from and emulating the path of modern Germany and its commitment to an honest reckoning with history and to the preservation of human dignity above all else. Examining the uncomfortable facts of our history and the inequities that they have systematized are tasks we embrace as an educational community, striving toward a better understanding of how our actions can dismantle systems that privilege some members of our community at the expense of others." Finally, in commemoration of Holocaust Remembrance Day, which ends tonight, the board will recite a poem called Bashert, written by Irena Klepsif, which we recited and discussed at our board retreat on Saturday in a session led by Dr. Christensen. The title of the poem is a Yiddish term that is hard to translate, but it can be described as being predestined, fated, inevitable, randomly selected, or soulmate. So the board members in the room will take turns reading the poem one line at a time, and we'll go around the room in that. Dr. Christensen, could you please start?
These words are dedicated to those who died.
These words are dedicated to those who died. Because they had no love and felt alone in the world.
Because they were afraid to be alone and tried to stick it out.
Because they could not ask.
Because they were shunned.
Because they were sick and their bodies could not resist the disease.
Because they played it safe. Because they had no connections.
Because they had no faith. Because they felt they did not belong and wanted to die.
These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because they were loners and liked it.
Because they acquired friends and drew others to them.
Because they took risks.
Because they were stubborn and refused to give up. Because they asked for too much.
These words are dedicated to those who died. Because a card was lost and a number was skipped.
Because a bed was denied.
Because a place was filled and no other place was left.
These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because someone did not follow through.
Because someone overlooked and forgot. Because someone left everything to God.
Because someone was late. Because someone did not arrive at all.
Because someone told them to wait and they just couldn't any longer.
These words are dedicated to those who died.
Because death is a punishment.
Because death is a reward.
Because death is the final rest. Because death is eternal rage.
These words are dedicated to those who died.
These words are dedicated to those who survived.
These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because their second grade teacher gave them books.
Because they did not draw attention to themselves and got lost in the shuffle.
Because they knew someone who knew someone else. Who could help them and bump them into a corner on a Thursday afternoon.
Because they played it safe. Because they were lucky.
These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because they knew how to cut corners.
Because they drew attention to themselves and always got picked.
Because they took risks.
Because they had no principles and were hard. These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because they refused to give up and defy statistics. Because they had faith and trusted in God.
Because they expected the worst and were always prepared.
Because they were angry.
Because they could ask.
Because they mooched off others and saved their strength.
Because they endured humiliation. Because they turned the other cheek.
Because they looked the other way. These words are dedicated to those who survived.
Because life is a wilderness and they were savage.
Because life is an awakening and they were alert.
Because life is a flowering and they blossomed.
Because life is a struggle and they struggled.
Because life is a gift and they were free to accept it. These words are dedicated to those who survived.
A shed.
Thank you, everybody. Right. So first item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any changes to the minutes from last month's meeting? Are there any changes to the agenda for tonight?
Yes,
Go ahead, Director Albers.
I would like to remove both policies, well, 6, the new policy, calendar policy that was not numbered yet, as well as 516 student medication for 1 more month, just to give them some more time.
Perfect. Thank you. So The proposal is to remove the calendar policy for approval tonight and the student medication policy for approval tonight. Any other changes? If not, I'll ask for unanimous consent to approve the agenda. Any objections? The agenda is approved. Okay, we had one letter to the board that is in the board packet, and it was from Erin Myers, who did intend to run for the board this year, but her letter explains that she was excited to see the slate of candidates that we have, and so she withdrew her application for the board and said she will continue to volunteer in her other capacities through the Mission and School Culture Committee and through the PTO and the design committee that she's been leading. So we're excited for Erin's continued contributions in so many ways and thank her for considering running for the board this year. That brings us to open forum tonight. Are there any guests on the line who would like to address the board in open forum? I don't think I'm missing anybody's hands, but if I am, speak up. Okay, we will close the open forum portion of the evening. And that brings us to our special recognition tonight. We are honoring several groups of volunteers and staff members who are contributing above and beyond in very important ways for TCGIS. Tonight, we start with recognizing our professional development committee members, and Director Christensen will give that recognition.
So professional development is a really critical part of the school year and of how our teachers function. We have a number of opportunities throughout the year for, we have professional development days, and within those days, people volunteer to offer sessions, and it just takes a lot of work to get those going and to make our school what it is. So it's the part of the school that parents don't see very much, but that makes our school really unique. You see it in the half days and you see it in the days off. And what happens on those days is a lot of really robust work that is organized by Yasmin Olbiosvig, Ginger Sanford, Kim Micklin, Dean Michael White, Dean Elizabeth St. Denny, and Claudia Miller, who is our PD coordinator. So their work is definitely not invisible within the school, but it's just a really critical component of what we do, and I'm really grateful for all that they do.
Great. All right. Next, we'd like to recognize the members of our Curriculum Advisory Committee, which is a very robust committee with several names, as you can see on the screen. So the Curriculum Advisory Committee is an entity that is mandated by the state that every school district needs to have one of these. And it's mandated in our school board policy 616. And so it needs to be, by definition in the policy, a diverse group of people, including parents, teachers, school administrators, and it's been led by Dean Noy. So, and I think that they're meeting next week actually for another curriculum advisory meeting. The purpose of this committee is to advise and assist the school district in the implementation of the school district's accountability system. They review the curriculum plan with an emphasis on implementing the Minnesota graduation standards. And they annually identify goals for our students to meet, and they recommend those goals to the school board. Those go towards the World's Best Workforce report, which is a separate report, but this committee supports that through identifying the goals. The advisory committee also makes recommendations to the school board regarding budget, the budget that we need to support our curriculum efforts. And I look forward to those recommendations at the May board meeting. So thank you so much to all of you who have volunteered your time and your talents. And you can see we also have alumni who participate in this, and they provide another perspective, which is super meaningful for the committee. So thank you, Stacy Flanagan, Maureen Carlisle, Abner Yemabab, Christine Chittenbar, Emily Ruggles Johnson, Danny Nicholson, Christine Waltz, Jean Bird, Linda Jenguin, alumni Ella Ireland, Mackenzie Johnson, and Ume Pankras, Dean Esther Noy, Executive Director Kirsten Christensen, Katie Jacobs, Ginger Sanford, Nina Maslowski, Yasmin Roth-Josvig, and Director Lisa Linnell. Next, we recognize our Capstone Committee members. And Director Bell, who is on the line, will do that recognition.
So the Capstone Committee, which I'm not a member of, but have worked closely with, is responsible for various things relative to the Capstone trip, which unfortunately we haven't been able to do for the past 3 years now. But one of the key things that they do is they raise funds to help offset the cost of the Capstone trip, so that the goal is to make Capstone achievable for any child who wants to go, regardless of their financial ability to pay for that. And so to that end, the school or the Capstone Committee has lots of different events where they raise money to offset the costs. So things like Capstone Cafe, which you may have heard about, which will be tied in with events such as the Martinstag, Lantern Parade. The Capstone Committee sold refreshments outside on the playground, engaging 8th grade kids to help in that process. And then most recently, there was, in conjunction with the book fair last week, the 8th graders sold refreshments again, and there happened to be a volleyball game, so that kind of was a nice tie-in also. But this is a really important aspect of the Capstone Committee of this trip. They help with inputs for the Capstone program with the school, and do a lot of work that is really important. So I'm talking mostly from the financial aspect, but I want to really thank these members, such as Mary Lee Tuitt, who has been a member for several years, Ellen Thompson, Maureen Carlisle, Julie Reavers, Josh Metcalf, Yasmin Roth-Josvig, Kevin Eberhardt, Esther Noy, and Elizabeth Same-Pfennig. And by the way, I did just get something from Mary Lee about, I think this year so far, it looks like there's about $3,900, I believe, that has been raised by the Capstone Committee towards the Capstone trip. So great work, a lot of dedication from these volunteers. So thank you very much for all of your work.
And next, we recognize the staff newsletter group. Director Albers.
Yes. The staff newsletter group is something that is new to this school year. It's run by Stephanie Simpson, Mary Zimmerman, and Roxanne Cornell, who are all staff here in various capacities. And they have created something where staff have basically got their own room brief to talk about what's going on in our lives, giving shout outs to different team members if we want to put in what we want to. So we can fill out a form and say, hey, I really want to give a shout out to this person for doing this. And it's just a really great way to kind of bring us all together even when we're still somewhat distanced, especially even just physically. I very rarely will see Herr Eberhardt around school, for example. So it's nice to sometimes see things that are going on in his classroom or vice versa. So I really appreciate all the work that they put into it. It's a very well organized piece of information that we get via email once a month. It's just, it's wonderful. It has all the important dates. It has links. It's really truly our own room brief in some ways that we can just kind of continue to form together. So to Stephanie, Mary, and Roxanne, thank you so much. It's been great this year.
All right, and finally, we will recognize the organizers of the book fair. This was the used book fair that took place last week. So this was in conjunction with the fundraising committee. And as Director Bell already mentioned, the Capstone Committee was there with 8th graders selling treats and whatnot as a fundraiser. And it was awesome to go to this with my kids and look through all the used books and pick out treasures in English and in German. All different levels were available. And we went home with a stack of books, and it was all donation based. So you could give whatever you wanted to give, which was really fantastic to see. And they also had baskets that people could purchase a ticket, and that was raffled off later. So it was a fantastic effort. It was super well organized and I think well attended. And I saw in the room brief today, the total amount raised was $1,900, I think. Yeah, $1,900 raised in that event. So, and I know Mary Zimmerman worked really hard to get that organized, and she was working late on those days. And I saw her last night at the event too. So, you know, people have been putting in some long days this week. And I did notice she had several volunteers to help her. So thank you to them. Christine Waltz, Jennifer Roos, Amy Hackett, Carrie Nelson, Alyssa Moffett, Andrea Struss, and Callie Orlova. Thank you all. All right, next item on the agenda is our director's report. I'll pass it over to you, Director Christensen.
Okay, thanks. Screen share here. Okay, as always, I'll start with the incident response team update. Just let those numbers settle in for a second. They're quite different from last month's update. We currently have 35 positive cases. Our current isolations or quarantines are 3. So I just wanted to mention, as most of you probably know from the communication we sent out, that a large portion of these came from or were within the group 6th and 7th graders and staff that accompanied them that went to Valse. We had within a few days, so they were at Valse for 4 days. We're all in school on Friday, and then the cases started to show up over the weekend and Monday. And so spread also happened outside of that group because they've been in this school. We consulted with MDH. Minnesota Department of Health has a school-specific team, and we have 3 members of that team that met with us on Monday. And I just think it's important for our school community to know that that team confirmed that everything that the school has done in advance of that trip is what they would have recommended. Students had to submit PCR tests ahead of the trip. They were masked on the bus. A large portion of their activities were outdoor. We were at a low risk or low community spread. So everything that we did is what we should have done. Spread happened anyway. So what we have learned, if anything, from that, for the Capstone trip to Chicago, the alternative trip to Chicago, is simply that we are going to tighten the timeframe for the PCR that has to be submitted. So in other words, they have to take it a little closer to departure. And that may help detect some cases a little, some asymptomatic cases a little better. They will also be masked on the bus on the Capstone trip. And there's some consideration of masking kids during other participants and during other parts of the trip, but that's yet to be determined. So
In addition to the PCR test, will they take an antigen test in the morning before departure?
Yes, so they have to submit a PCR test that has to be taken. I'm not remembering the exact timeline. I think it's within 48 hours of departure. And then they have to submit a negative rapid antigen test with a timestamp from that morning in order to get on the bus. And that was true of the Boston trip as well. Just a little longer window, I think 3 days or something for the PCR test.
Director Bell, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question about the case numbers, and if there's 35 positive cases, why are there only 3 quarantines? Wouldn't the 35 people be in quarantine? Just asking for a friend.
I wish Ashley were here. So say again.
Is that in addition to, like, people that may have isolated because of those being in contact with the 35 cases?
Diane, I'm actually not entirely 100% sure how to answer that question, but I think it's probably what Emily said, that it might be those refer to close contacts, in which case it wouldn't be isolations. It should just be quarantines. I just took it straight off of the dashboard.
Okay.
This is what's on the dashboard. So I can check.
The protocol, Director Bell, is that someone that tests positive would need to stay home for 5 days. And then
10 days for kids.
yeah, for staff is what I'm thinking, but kids is for 10 days. Staff are allowed back days 6 through 10 if they wear a mask.
Yeah, I think her question though is why is that 35 isolations of quarantines if we've got that many? Yeah, and I think it's probably because those refer. I'll text Ashley and see if I can get an answer for you for the end of the meeting.
Well, and then to follow up on Julie's statement there, why is there a difference between the number of days for staff and for students?
It's real straightforward. So the CDC guidelines are that after 5 days, you can come back, but the next 5 days have to be strictly masked.
Okay.
Staff can strictly mask because they can isolate during lunchtime. Students cannot. Students have to have and students are around other students while they're eating, which means they are unmasked around other people for the next 5 days, right? So we have no capacity to isolate students who come back for 5 days. And so they're isolated for the full 10 days because they cannot be strictly masked within a school setting. It's simply not possible because they have to eat.
Yeah. So, but if a kid has a negative PCR test on day 5, they still have to stay home? Because if kids aren't vaccinated, of which there are some, if they do a PCR test that shows that, they're negative, if they've been around somebody, how would that be different from a kid who was vaccinated, gets sick or tests positive on a PCR, but then, 5 days later, they test negative on a PCR, they still have to stay home for 5 days?
I think the difference is that the other kid wouldn't have had a positive test ever, but so anytime there's a positive test, we actually don't recommend testing again after that. And by we, I mean public health officials. Yeah, so a positive is a positive, and it's 5 days for staff with masks after that, 10 days for students because they can't reliably keep masks on throughout the day.
Yeah,
And I did
No,
get a message back from Ashley just to answer your question, Director Bell. It was a typo. It should have said 35, not 3.
oh, all right, that makes sense.
Mhm.
You might not be the only person doing this. Any other questions on the IRT stuff?
No, but just briefly, we have an email from Lisa saying to, when participating remotely, that cameras need to be on to comply with open meeting laws.
Okay. Is that for me?
No, it's for Julie.
That's for board members, not audience members.
Oh, thank you, Director Leno. So I haven't
Okay.
been looking, but can all board members please have their cameras on to comply with open meeting law? Thank you for the reminder, Director Leno.
Enrollment update. These are our current numbers. We're at 600 as of our current as of a week ago. We had a new 3rd grader and 5th grader enrolled as of 4/18. Thank you, Director Alcatu, for talking to your neighbors.
Happy
We're
to.
dismayed after the long Minneapolis public school strike.
And other factors, but
And other factors. Unless anybody has questions on this, I will move on to the 2022-23 numbers, which are great, kind of exciting. I'll just let you look at those for a hot minute. So we have the enrollment numbers. Then the withdrawing and maybe withdrawing refer to current students. So we just received back the results of our re-enrollment survey, right, of current families, whether they're staying or not, 90% return rate, which is mind-blowingly high for any survey. And we had 25 of those respondents who indicated that they're either withdrawing or maybe withdrawing 25 and withdrawing 2. So that's pretty good retention. We're doing some really intentional outreach to those 25 families in the next week or so to find out what factors are behind them, what we can do to support them in maybe making a positive decision to stay. And then waitlist, of course, refers to those who are hoping to get in. So enrollment coordinator Nicole Kershell did this chart for us that I thought is really helpful. So in regards to the maybes, right? So she projected 3 scenarios here. If all students who are accepted stay, if all students who said they're withdrawing do in fact leave, and none of the maybes leave, then we would be at 631. If all the accepted students stay, all the withdrawing students leave, and half of those leave, then we'd be at 619. If all the accepted stay, all the withdrawing leave, and all of the maybes leave, we'd be at 606. So those are just 3 possible scenarios, but in any case, the worst of those scenarios is the house is still higher than this year, and in a better position budgetarily for next year for sure. Yeah.
Can you go back the slide just for
Yeah.
a second? I think that next slide is great. I would add another scenario, including waitlist. Because seeing the 606, you know, I know it's worst case scenario and we likely won't see it, but it can be could be concerning to some. But if you consider that you're saying 3 maybe withdrawings are leaving, but we have 15 on the wait list for 1st grade, we're probably not going to see that number. Does that make sense?
Which number?
The 606. Because sure, all of the maybes might leave, but we might get half of those or more back in the wait list. So
I think she actually intentionally didn't include the wait list because she wanted to look at worst case scenarios so that we could be looking at our worst possible numbers, knowing that they're almost certainly going to be better.
okay.
But thank you for bringing that up. Other questions about enrollment? So just a super brief staffing and hiring update. For kindergarten, we have an offer out. We're waiting. We've been waiting. He's asked for more time. If we get him, he'll be amazing. We have also an amazing person in the wings if he says no. So we're good there. We just got a rejected offer from a middle school science teacher who's American that has lived in Germany for a very long time. He was very interested, but for a number of kind of complicated family reasons, didn't feel like he could make the move, the international move this year. Would be interested next year. We'll see if we still have a position next year. So we're still looking for a middle school science teacher. We have a few possibilities there. We're still waiting to fill elementary school and middle school sport. We have postings out for 3 new EAs for each of the kindergarten sections. We're adding a new middle school language immersion specialist, and we're considering ways that we might combine that partial position with sport, maybe fill some of that. And finally, we will be hiring 3 teachers and 2 EAs using ESSER 3 funds to teach summer school math and German.
We have a question from Director Linnell.
Yeah.
Yes, do we know anything more about the Director of Special Education?
It is the same as it was last month. We anticipate that he will be. So for those that don't recall, we made an offer to him. It's been now a couple of months or longer, and he accepted the position, but his contract, because he's under a union contract, he can't leave before the end of the school year. And his school district is kind of playing hardball about it. And so we still fully anticipate, we've had continued communication with him. We fully anticipate having him join us in July when his contract is officially up and he can leave without any repercussions. None too soon. It's been really hard to have him out there and not be able to have him.
And just to clarify, it's not Director of Special Ed, but Dean of.
Yeah,
Special
sorry.
Dean,
Thank you.
yes, I'm
Dean-
sorry,
Dean
thank
of
you.
Special education. Yep.
Do we know if our Director of SPED and Assistant Director of SPED will stay the same next year?
We anticipate.
Okay. Very good.
Can I ask
Thank
a
you.
question? Oh. She's still going.
She's done.
Or just thank you.
Yeah, Director
Um,
Dayton.
Thank you. I'm sorry to go back, but with the enrollment numbers, I think there's like maybe a monumental thing that we've reached here for TCGIS. We're gonna have 3 cohorts in each grade for the first time ever. Is that right?
Right. So we talked about that last month, right? That this will be the first year that we've had 3 8th grade cohorts, and therefore the first time that all 3 grades will have. Yeah, I had that in red last month. I took it out, but it's worth noting every time. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, every month I think it feels a little more certain. So
Yep, it's happening.
Yeah.
And we've made the adjustments we need in the school, figuring out space so that we can accommodate a 3rd section. So yeah, it's really, really exciting.
And then what about teachers? Do we need to add teachers to cover that?
Not full bodies, but we're playing with FTEs.
Mhm. Is that on your list on the next page?
No, I mean, we're not hiring any new people. Does that
Okay.
make sense? We're sort of moving, because not everyone has a 1.0, so does that make sense? So we don't
Yeah,
need,
so will the budget increase to cover, like is someone going from a 0.8 to a 1.0? So their salary will increase?
I am not the person to answer that.
Okay, that's okay.
I mean, I am the person to answer that. But I'm not equipped to answer that in this moment.
We can follow up.
I'll get an answer,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay, so Julie asked me to just give a little kind of a recap of an anti-racist professional development training that we had for all staff, and board was invited to that as well on April 15th. This was facilitated by Angelo Camufingo, who is Angolan German, Afro-German, lives in Berlin, based in Berlin. He's the founder of Stubborn Consulting, a social justice initiative that advocates for the interests of marginalized people in educational, primarily, also nonprofit, governmental, and other settings. He is a very, very active speaker and facilitator, and most recently, at the end of March, spoke in the opening session of the European Union's Anti-Racism Summit, along with the, totally blanking on their titles, but basically the people in charge of equity and inclusion for the entire European Union, or the European Commission. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things. He spent 2 hours working with staff. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things since I'm doing this report. I'm highlighting things that stood out for me. Things obviously stood out differently to others, and I probably should have pulled out some of the really amazing comments we got from staff. We did a survey ahead of time to ask for the kinds of for experiences that staff have had in relation to being anti-racist educators, and then we had some great follow-up questions. This I thought was interesting.
There's a
because it
question
highlights-
from Director Bell.
Oh, sorry.
Director Bell, go ahead.
Sorry, that was, never mind. It was already answered. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So I know not everyone can read this, but I just wanted to show you this graphic to highlight an issue that he brought up. We teach our kids primarily in German in this school. And he talked about one of the challenges of talking about racism and anti-racism in Germany is that there are different terms used in German. So for example, the most common term used to refer to people of color is a term that can also refer to people who are not of color. And that is, the translation would be people with an immigration background. So if you'll see here, the most common countries from which people with an immigration background come in this chart here, with the exception of Syria, and even that, those people may or may not identify as people of color, would mostly not identify as people of color. Turkey, perhaps, Poland, Russia, Kazakhstan, Syria, Romania, Italy, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Greece, and Kosovo. So in other words, a term as broad as that can't necessarily capture, you might all, so some people might all have an immigration background, but someone like Angelo, for example, this is not a term that works for him and his story. He was born in Germany, his native tongue is German, so he does not have an immigration background himself. His father came from Angola to East Germany, but it's not his own story. So he is German, right? He's an Afro-German, he's a Black German. And so being able to talk to our students about the ways that issues of race and racism and reference to people of color was just an important thing to highlight for our staff. And then within those terms, he talks about these terms here: racialized people, people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, people with experience with racism. That's the green one. I thought it was particularly interesting. People who have experienced racism, and then people with a migration background. Which terms are we using? What do the terms mean? Which terms are we questioning? How do we translate the terms? A particularly interesting question for our students, right? How do we describe people, and when do we describe people, in what context? So allowing people to determine for themselves what terms they choose. He, for example, said that he rejects the term a person of color. He didn't say which term he would choose instead, but that self-determination is really important in the terms that we choose. Then he introduced a term that was new to me, I have to say, and several people in the comments on the survey indicated it was also new to them, and that is the term adultism. And he talked about the intersectionality of racism and adultism, and that when we're teaching kids about being allies and anti-racist citizens, that it's important that we listen to young people, ask questions, welcome their ideas and support, and not assume, in other words, that we have all the answers, right? Commit to change, speaking up. And then I really love this question in the bottom left corner: would I speak to an adult in this way? a wonderful question, right, for adults to ask when they're interacting with children, specifically on these issues and in other contexts. Okay, so those are just a few highlights. Kevin, and I'm just going to put you on the spot. Is there anything you want to add from that session that stood out to you, either of you, and anybody else who was there? I know there were some board members there as well.
I think so we got to split up into into different groups, and what I really liked about that was the ability to talk amongst staff and kind of think about how does this impact what we do as educators. And I found it really helpful to just sit in a room and to use what he had been mentioning in the first part, and then kind of mold it to the way that we at TCGIS kind of work. And we came up with some ideas that I hope will, push forward in terms of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. So I really appreciated that part, and then we got to share out at the end. So
Yeah, what I probably appreciated most about this part of the PD Day was that we had some open discussion time about this issue, because you can be told many things, but I think it's very important to have open conversations with people you work with very closely and see where they're coming from and what they're thinking. And I think that had been missing up to that point. We were always confronted with what other people think, but not really what we as a group think.
Yeah, and that came through in the comments. I pulled up the comments here. It's not on screen, but I'll just read a couple of them. So I just want to mention that we were intentional in seeking out a German anti-racist educator of color for that unique perspective. We've had anti-racist educators, of course, in our school before, and we've had anti-racist educators of color before, but they've all had a US perspective. And so just because we also teach German culture, we thought that perspective would be important. So just a couple of contexts here. The international perspectives on an issue which I most often view and experience through an American lens were important. Intersectionality and adultism, hearing books that I mostly had a positive impression of being presented as problematic. He kind of talked through some different books. I had never heard of adultism. I also found the history comparison between Germany and America really fascinating. Being able to discuss as colleagues together after listening. Angela's perspective on racism in Germany was really interesting. He mentioned a survey in Germany that was done in which most people thought racism wasn't an issue in Germany. People of color who took the survey, in contrast, thought it was a huge issue. I think that clearly means that there is a problem, but that it's not on most people's radar. And so some other really wonderful questions, and including some requests for more tools. There were several requests for more tools. What can we do with this knowledge? How can we use it with our students? How to deal in high conflict situations, how to talk sensitively about race, and how to prepare our students. So I really appreciated the questions from staff, because they really focused on their understanding that this training was to help them, but so they could help students, right? We have this real responsibility in a K-8 school to prepare students for high school, where they will, without question, face more situations in which their skills as an ally will be called upon. And so it's really important. It's a really important time in our students' lives. And I know that our staff feel that and approach this training in that light.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Director Dayton.
I really appreciate that you went about it in this way, that you sought out a German educator in anti-racist training that identifies as a person of color, but this educator specifically does not identify as a person of color. And I'm wondering how we went about finding him, but also I think there's some things for us to learn here in the United States with the Census Bureau not allowing people to identify in the way that they would choose to identify, or being about 20 years behind the way people would choose to self-identify. It's a particular struggle that we have where we are identifying other people and claiming that they're self-identifying. So I think I'm first wondering how we identified this person, And then if that is part of the training where like he understands that from the American perspective, he appears to be a person of color, but in the training is explaining that that is not how he identifies himself.
So he mentioned that so offhand. So he does anti-racism training. He, he talks about having a black parent and a white parent. So he clearly identifies as being biracial. It was the term BIPOC in particular that he didn't like. So we found him because two members of the admin team had heard him speak 2 years ago in a Goethe Institute anti-racism seminar and were really moved by what he had shared and impressed. And so they had heard him before and felt like he would be really good for our particular context. So that's how we had found him. But it does raise issues, right, about identity. I appreciate while people were in their groups, I had a really interesting chance to just chat with him while everyone else was out. He has such an interesting family background, and he said that life is too short to put up with racism in his own life, right? So he said he's very bold in calling people out, and he said, and that includes my white grandma. And so he talked about conversations that he has with her regularly. Well, she'll say something and he'll say, "Grandma, you can't say that, that's racist." And he said she's doing the work, right? And so he tries to live that in his own life, both personally and professionally. The former East Germany had relatively few people of color compared to the West, mostly from Angola, Mozambique, Cuba, and North Vietnam, communist brother countries, brother nations. People were brought over either as guest workers or as students. I believe his father was a student. And this is a whole other conversation about East Germany. The former East Germanian historians are just now starting to come to terms with the presence of Blacks in the former East Germany and racism in the former East Germany. So, his personal history ties in with that. And now we have a unified Germany for over 30 years. So there's just lots of work that Germany itself is doing. And, it's important to note that a German perspective needs to inform the work that we're doing with kids who are growing up in America, right? So it can't replace, they have to be able to function here. But because they're learning about Germany, it's important and interesting that they also be able to understand how these conversations are unfolding in Germany and what factors play in there.
So bear with me, I might be extrapolating a little bit here, but I think what was the term? Migrationshintergrund?
Migrationshintergrund.
Thank you. There's a language component to it that it doesn't always identify as a person of color, but it is this sort of rich background that doesn't always translate to the dominant culture that we have in America, right? I think the Department of Education sometimes perpetuates the inability for students to self-identify, and I wonder, this is the extrapolation part here, if there's a role for us as the German immersion school in creating some sort of a coalition with the other immersion schools around the Twin Cities or around Minnesota to challenge some of those characteristics that the Department of Education relies on to talk about what our students look like in schools. I know.
That'll be an uphill battle.
I know.
But you have an absolute point, right? So the forms that our students have to fill out, right? The way they identify may or may not accord with how they feel about themselves, or may not incorporate everything they feel about themselves. They might have to pick one or the other, right? So yeah, it's a problem. And so what we say about our student body may not reflect how they feel about themselves.
Absolutely. I help in creating those forms and I see them problematic from the inception of them, right? But maybe it's just a letter that we all sign on to together, like, hey, we see this from a different perspective, and here's another way you could look at it if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Maybe diversity of belonging.
I'd be happy to work on that.
Awesome.
Okay, let me share again. Any other questions on that? Thanks for giving me a chance to recap that. It was, I think, a meaningful day. We anticipate bringing Angelo back, probably in collaboration with an American-based anti-racism educator for hopefully, if COVID will allow, an in-person facilitation. Okay, moving along. Okay, so it's not going to be as exciting now what we're going to talk about. Hang on. It's loading. There we go. All right, so here, let me just stay on this nice slide for just a second before we get to the numbers that are going to blow your mind. Okay, so as you all know, we are up for contract renewal with our authorizer at University of St. Thomas, and we are in the final stages of that contract renewal process. And there are a few metrics, new metrics for the new contract that have been proposed. And so I really hope I did this the way you would have wanted me to, Julie, but I pulled out from the contract, the proposed metrics, what we landed on. And there's still some language that is not fully tweaked, but I think you'll be able to see most of what we're working on. So just, Julie, you can help clarify if there's anything that doesn't make sense. So the board has seen these, admin has seen these, and they're in the final stages of being proposed. So basically, we have a conversation with our authorizer team. They propose things and we can counter propose things. And by things, I mean ways in which we will be measured on in a variety of areas. So let's get started. So
we have a question here from Director Linnell.
Oh, sure.
I was just going to ask if the slide needed to be advanced, so it looks like you just did. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So the document that the board has seen previously included our prior goals. I only put, for the sake of brevity, because there's already a lot on the slides that you're going to see. I've only included the metrics for the coming contract for the next 5 years. And we only were asked to tweak certain goal areas, so I'm just including those. It's a very long contract, so we're only going to focus on the ones where there were things that we needed to change or we wanted to have changes. The first area is a mission-specific goal for ours. Our mission-specific goal centers on German immersion. In the past contract, we had a single metric, and that was the DSGI-1 exam, which is the exam that our kids take in 8th grade. As a school that teaches German beginning in kindergarten, that struck us as a little bit paltry. Right? And so we ask to be measured in a number of different areas. So we assess students throughout their time here. And so we've added all of these things here. So including the student oral proficiency exam in 2nd grade, the A1 exam, which is administered in 3rd grade, the A2 exam, which is administered in 6th grade, and then finally the DSD1 exam. And I'll just point out, so we have certain metrics here. These are how we would meet the expectations. And I just want to point out that on number 3 and 5, we have proposed, and so the things that are in yellow are the overall, all the students in 3rd grade that take that test. We're hoping that 75% of them will pass. We're also proposing that 75% of those who entered TCGIS in 2nd or 3rd grade will pass. So in other words, students who didn't enter in kindergarten or 1st grade. And so this is a way to measure how well we are doing in supporting students who didn't enter right at the beginning. And so after consultation with Kevin and Yasmin, those numbers, so I think actually we need to tweak these, because as I'm looking at them, number 5 is higher than number 4, which wouldn't make sense, would it, Kevin?
No, that doesn't. The
Probably the
number
other way
5
around.
should be lower.
Yeah,
Because it's more difficult to
Yeah.
pass the exam when you enter late.
yeah. So we probably have a little bit of tweaking there still to do, but
So to clarify, I think the team had come up with the 75% students should pass if they enter later, right? And so then subsequent to that, we added, well, we need to track the whole grades. And
these
so
are the-
I was anticipating the percentages to be higher than 75% that you would expect to pass. Because we had set 75%
yeah,
for the new ones. So do we want 80% or?
I don't know if that's,
feasible.
no, if that's my answer right now, as a board member, but.
So I think you can go back and confer
We can
with,
go back and tinker with that. So these are, Yasmin and Kevin considered the numbers that they felt like overall could pass, but I think I hadn't given them what we had proposed for the subgroups there to keep those in mind. So we can look at that again. And yes, you're right, that we would definitely want the subgroups to pass at a slightly lower rate than the overall group. Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Director Hyde.
2 and 3 on an annual basis. 75% of students will pass the A1 exam. And then 75% of students who enter.
Yeah, so
will
that
pass.
needs to be lower. So that's the same thing.
Okay,
So we need to fix 2 and 3, the relationship between 2 and 3 and the relationship between 4 and 5 need to be fixed.
I see.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be administered in 3rd grade, even if they
It's
enter
always,
in 3rd
yeah,
grade?
it's always administered in 3rd grade.
Okay.
Right, and so what we're wanting to look at there is if they enter in 3rd grade or if they enter in 2nd grade and therefore have had less time to prepare arguably than the others, how well are we doing? So we've never been measured by this before, so that's partly why we're still tinkering with it, because we're trying to put a measure in there that we think we can reach.
And which number will change? The yellow one?
The
Is that your
overall-
anticipation?
Perhaps.
We're not sure. So
Okay.
the relationship between them will change. I can just tell you that. And I apologize for the confusion there. I just plugged in the numbers from an email from Kevin
Yeah.
today and then just failed to look at the relationship there. So it'll probably be 2 or 3 percentage points lower, something like that, right? For the subgroup. Right?
And, yep, and for number 3, the way I'm reading this is if we, for some reason, get a 3rd grader that joins with 2 weeks left of the school year,
Mhm.
they're gonna be part of that number?
They would. We don't
They
have
would?
very many, we don't have very many students like that.
Okay, so because of the rarity of the situation,
Yeah.
we're not concerned about it?
Yeah.
All right, understood.
It's really a way to hold ourselves accountable
Mhm.
For bringing those students in. Oops.
So I'd propose perhaps considering the 80% that we have for number 6 for our 8th graders. It seems reasonable that we would want them to achieve that throughout their time at TCGIS.
I'm not comfortable committing to that here.
You don't need to commit to it,
Yeah.
but just,
We'd want to look at their actual passing rates.
We don't have those right now?
I don't have them
Okay,
right
that was
right
gonna be
now,
my next question. I will avoid asking it.
unless you do.
I don't right now.
Yeah,
I
So-
sure I have them somewhere, but.
so I apologize in putting this together that I didn't notice that, but so there will be a distinction between the subgroup and the overall group that will be meaningful enough to make it matter. And it may be 80%, but that might also be too high. We wanted to get them up to 80%
mhm.
in passing. And of course, the DSD one is a very different test also than the other ones. Although the A1 and the A2 are prep tests for that. Okay, so there's lots of slides here to get through. So, and Julie, you're just gonna have to help me with some of these. This particular metric is still, we are still waiting for input from the authorizer. So this is about reading proficiency. In the rubric as established by the authorizer, it was 55%. We haven't been meeting that. So we're considering adjusting it, either adjusting it to 45% or picking a different grade and it would probably be 5th grade. So what's at stake here? We're an immersion school that doesn't begin teaching English literacy until 3rd grade. It's typical in immersion schools that do what we do, that don't begin teaching English literacy until 3rd grade, to have not awesome scores on a literacy test that tests English literacy in 3rd grade. By 8th grade, our students kind of knock it out of the park. They're well over 85%, something like that in 8th grade. So it's a trajectory that is a little delayed compared to other schools. So that's what the authorizer has to tell us what they will approve. Well, they're either approve moving the percentage pass rate down for 3rd grade, or we'll just pick a different grade. Does that make sense? And we haven't heard yet from them.
But they said they're open to one or the other.
They're open
They
to
have
one or the
decide.
other, or to look at our fast grid proficiency rate as a 3rd option.
Because they understood the reasoning
They
behind it.
understood the reasoning. I will say, so I attend something called the Minnesota Principals Academy that I did that today and doing that tomorrow, and our current unit is on literacy. And my head is spinning a lot about being okay with 50% proficiency in 3rd grade, whatever the reasons, right? And so, right. So there's lots, I think, lots of conversations our school can have, even if we get better by 8th grade, the fact that only, half of our kids are proficient in reading, even though it's clearly impacted by 2nd language acquisition, and there's lots of research on that. I would like us to still be concerned about, I see in your furrowed eyebrows that you share the same.
If I may, because the MCAs are new for every child, no matter immersion or not, in the state of Minnesota in 3rd grade, most of the things that 3rd grade teachers will actually look for is how to take the test, because it's actually quite complicated online for them to have to move things. They have to be able to push down on the space bar or the trackpad and move items in the test, and we practice that during school. So that's part of the thing too, is taking the test in 3rd grade is sometimes just difficult in itself. So
Dr. Christensen, what is the pass rate in German literacy for our students in 3rd grade? You probably don't know off the top of your head, but.
Well, we don't. So you mean on our screeners? Or what do you mean?
Yeah,
So
our German screeners.
the screeners don't actually test literacy, they
Okay.
test fluency, and that's different. So literacy also includes comprehension. And what our screeners do, this is another conversation, but what our screeners do is they test a student's ability to read a certain number of words accurately, as in with accurate pronunciation, right? And with more or less accurate, what they call prosody, or sort of a cadence of the text within a certain amount of time. That doesn't necessarily track with comprehension in a 2nd language. There's much higher correlation between fluency and comprehension in your mother tongue, but not necessarily in a 2nd language. But because we also have other screeners for English and we have teacher input, these screeners, these German screeners, allow us to determine, is a student struggling with German or are they struggling with literacy? And so it's actually a real strength of our school that we have these screeners, but we can't compare the German screen. We don't actually have a German literacy screener at 3rd grade to compare it to.
So I just have a comment. So I understand why how language immersion affects English reading skills in the 3rd grade. I understand that. I also really like the idea of putting more emphasis on English literacy in the 3rd grade or by the 3rd grade. I think that kind of fits into kind of a theme that we've pushed over the last couple of years in terms of like really focusing again on the academics and make sure our academics are really strong. We've talked about that in math. And so I like that idea as something that gets some attention, in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. I think that really is a great way for TCGIS to rebuild, to grow even stronger. So I think that's a great idea. I just wanted to, I know we're having a conversation about other things, but that caught my ear.
Yeah, there are immersion schools that are immersion schools, but also teach English literacy for short amounts of time beginning in kindergarten. That's the thing. We don't do that here. I'm not going to get into that here because I'm not going to commit my academic team to anything, but that is a thing that is done in other immersion schools for the purposes of supporting students in their English language literacy.
Mhm.
And there are programs that are designed to have just little chunks of time throughout the day. Like I'm talking 20 minutes,
Yeah.
right? A 20-minute focus on English literacy. So that is done in other immersion school settings. I don't know if it's done in immersion schools like ours, and dual language schools are slightly different than ours. And I know some that do that, but there's lots of really good research on literacy and bilingualism and the challenges and what we see when. And so whatever we do, it's really important to me that it's evidence-based.
Mhm.
And so that I just made that statement to just say that it's important to me that as we move forward, that we not just accept a certain percentage and assume always that it's tied to
Yeah.
the fact that we're a bilingual school, if we can determine that that's true, but if we also can figure out that our kids need support in a different way that would allow them to do better, then I don't want to just rest
So
on our
let's do that.
bilingualism always.
Yeah, let's work on the school.
Work on the school, exactly.
Dr. Hyde?
Two things I'll chime in quick. Anecdotally, as the father of a third grader, it was a light switch this summer. It felt like one day I was trying to teach her, how to syllableize words so she could say them, and to reading like chapter books. So I understand, and as evidence in my life, believe that that's the case. Back to this slide, is there any way to do both? I know it was, said adjust to, or what if we, presented the authorizer with, let us adjust the third grade number down
And also add.
and add a fifth grade, and that's saying we believe that this is happening. Our confidence that this is happening will add the fifth, and our students will be up to average or higher by fifth grade.
That's interesting.
I am interested in Dr. Iwan's comment though, and perhaps I'm reading into your statement, but were you suggesting maybe we keep it as is and hold ourselves to this standard? Try to get, we're not, so the meet standard is 55% and we're at 50%. From what I understand from the
We're at
slide.
50% or the current rubric.
So 55% is in the current rubric, right? The one that they're proposing for the coming year.
And our current
From-
current MCA data says 50% meet.
We will almost certainly not meet that anytime soon with the way things like.
What is the 50% class meets or exceeds?
That's
last rubric?
our current third grade.
So we're just 5% below meeting.
No, that's the current rubric.
No, that's
So
where we
That's
this,
our
are.
this
current-
entire
okay.
rubric is brand new this year, where they focus on third grade.
Got it. I read it different.
5% is not nothing. I know. it feels like-
Understood, but
Julie, I would say so clearly Director Christensen has this idea. I would, let's let her bring it back to her team and then they can talk about it. And the other thing
Yeah.
we can also remember is that this needs to get approved for the contract, but we can always change these year to year.
Year to year, that's
So once
right.
if they have a plan put together, then next year we can say, hey, we can reach 50% or 60%. We're gonna implement the things you need to do. And then let's change it down.
okay, Director Eberhard.
Yeah, and something I want to add is the influence of COVID, those
Thank
2
you.
years. That's something that came up in our conversation too, is it's really hard to determine after all that happened, what a good percentage point is, because everything has been so disrupted that you can look at the numbers before, but it really is not the same thing that we're looking at right now. So it's really hard to determine. You're guessing in a lot of places.
Mhm.
And that's pretty universally the conversation that's happening around assessment right now, right? Is what is our benchmark even, right? Because of all the disruption and learning recovery that needs to happen still.
Mhm.
We can ask them about the third grade and fifth grade thing. It's an interesting point, right? And keep in mind that whether or not it's in this metric, we can still track it internally,
Mhm.
right? So that's worth noting. So the next item, this is about comparison schools. So I took this to the academic team. We remain flummoxed by this. We don't have clear comparison schools. And so I think we're gonna have to take that back to the authorizer and get some just guidance from them.
Mhm.
We are different, we're just different, right? We're very similar in some ways to Yinghua, for example, the Chinese Immersion Language Immersion Academy were different in other ways. We don't just have a list of schools that just comes off the tongue and that we compare ourselves to, and that's relevant to, no, that's not relevant to that one. But anyway, so we're still working on that one.
Is the French school run, because it's full public school, does it run different enough to not be considered a comparable school?
I'm not sure. Yeah. But it's just a really tricky question.
Mhm.
So we're working on that before we finalize.
What does virtual mean in the sentence? A virtual
Do
comparison
you
group?
remember, Julie? What that meant?
I don't. No.
Yeah, I focused on the comparable schools.
Yeah,
I don't remember the last.
and I know I read it last time we read through it, and I was gonna ask then, and I completely forgot, but I saw it again.
We did ask her about it when we met, and she said there's a detailed description in one of the long documents that they shared with us.
Okay.
So we can find it.
Yeah, just paired with the word group, I'm wondering if there's a way to like create, since something, a comparable school doesn't exist, like is there parameters at different schools that we can grab together to make our own comparable?
You will see as we slog our way through this, why I'm so grateful that we were renewed for 5 years. And that we only have to do this.
It's also
again.
why I'm not very intrigued about tweaking it every year either. I'd like
Well,
to get it right.
I
Um,
thought that every time
I
somebody
think the
said it-
advantage of tweaking is that it just allows us, it's a living document and it allows us to see. I mean, I actually appreciate that it's not in stone for 5 years, because we might realize after a year, holy cow, why did we choose that metric, right? And so we do have some nimbleness there. Okay, moving on, academic progress. So
Hey, can I ask, excuse me, can I ask a question? I had my hand up.
Sure,
I
go
did
ahead,
too.
Director Bell.
I wanted to go back to your comment about that there aren't any truly comparable schools. And I wanted to ask, as far as the comparison with Yinghua, what are the areas where Yinghua is not comparable to us?
I'm not prepared to answer that question. I'm not prepared to answer that question.
So, okay, because I think that they're the most similar to us of any other school. And it would be interesting to be able to articulate, if you need to have a comparison school, that's the most similar, I think, to us. And it would be interesting to see what are the key differences that would make it difficult to.
Yeah, you'll notice it's not school, it's schools.
Yeah, I was just gonna
Yeah.
say that.
So this
I
is where
see
it
that.
gets tricky, right? Is finding a group of schools. We may find, I mean, Yinghua may indeed be the most comparable, but they want a cohort essentially of schools.
And if you tell them that there isn't a cohort, because we are such a unique school, but there is one that is as close to us as you can find. So unlike any other, like a traditional public school where there's lots of different schools to compare yourself to, there aren't for us. So maybe, can you go back to them and say a group, schools plural is going to be really difficult, but we could find school singular.
I don't think they'll be okay with that, but we can go back to them It's not in stone yet. It's not finalized yet. It's not signed, sealed, and delivered. So we still have. a
I
couple
would
of
just,
them.
I would be curious to see what the real differences are between Yinghua and TCGIS. Because I think they are really quite comparable, the most comparable you'll find.
So I think we just choose which category we want to pursue, and then that's actually the authoriser's job to find the schools.
Mhm.
So it's determining if we want virtual or not, so we have to find the definition for that. Can we go on to the next one?
Yeah.
Oh, Director Linnell, you have a question?
Yeah, just one question. Would it be possible to create a group of comparable schools for the two predominant high schools that we feed into? Take the charter schools that also feed into those high schools and create a group from that. That's one way that we could get kind of a broad swath and be driving toward a metric that makes sense. Where are kids going to high school? How are we compared to the competition that they're going to seek or they're going to find when they get to high school from the charter school community?
Maybe, although we feed into a number of different high schools, right?
Mhm.
Can you clarify that a little bit?
Again, I think the authorizer chooses the
Yeah, I
schools
don't think
though.
we have to choose
The particular schools, we choose which category.
Yeah, we're choosing either virtual comparison group or comparable schools. Right?
Right.
But it sounds like the discussion was that we were trying to choose and that we decided there wasn't any that were comparable in our view. So which is it? We choose or the authorizer chooses?
well, that might have been my error. That's how the conversation unfolded in the admin group and on the admin team, excuse me, on the academic team, not with the authorizer. So Julie, I'm so.
So we'll have to circle back with the authorizer.
Yeah, we'll just have to circle back on this rather than getting bogged down in it. Okay, move on.
Yep.
Okay. So this next one is looking at MCA proficiency with state demographic comparison by race, ethnicity, and students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So you'll see FRL throughout here. Our student demographic groups performing as well as or better than the state average for that student group. So this is an interesting thing for our school. We talked about this at the retreat. For schools with greater than 70% students qualifying for free and reduced lunch, demographic categories will also be filtered by free and reduced lunch status and not displayed separately. We're at about 10%. We're way below 70%. For schools with less than 30% of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch, demographic categories will not be filtered by free and reduced lunch status and not displayed separately. That's for student privacy purposes, right? Because some of our, so basically we've established a minimum threshold here because we have, for example, a very small number of Hispanic students. If we were to, that first of all, MDE, as it says here, cell sizes greater than, have to be greater than 10. MDE will not look at groups smaller than 10 because it compromises student privacy. Because if you have only 2 Hispanic students in your school, you can name them, right? Then their privacy is compromised. So, whoops. So I think it was Megan's suggestion that we have a minimum threshold there as opposed, in addition to the maximum. So they will be individually scored. And the overall score is then produced by averaging the subject area score, so meaning math and reading.
So I think what the authorizer said was that if a group is less than 10, it's not separated automatically.
Right, that's
So
that's an MDE thing.
it sounds like we don't have to change the wording here.
Right. So does that make sense, Megan? So your suggestion is already incorporated in basically in state law. So
The addition to that was the free and reduced lunch though, right? There's no minimum category that MDE sets for free and reduced lunch. And we're one of the rare schools that has a very low share of students. So it's not necessarily related to race or ethnic groups, which is what MDE has the minimum threshold for, but it's how those groups fit into the free and reduced lunch. So we've got fewer than 10% of our student body qualifies for free and reduced lunch, right?
Correct.
So
About 10%.
right. So they have a maximum threshold, MDE, or the authorizer does, I don't remember which one it is.
MDE.
It's MDE, the 70% is MDE. So,
Oh, well, no, that's the authorizer, the 10, cell size greater than 10. Is that what you-
yep, but the 70% for free and reduced lunch is just the authorizer. Okay, but then the other side of that, the minimum for free and reduced lunch outside of race ethnicity, I think is still gonna be a problem for privacy concerns. Because we're basically identifying the students.
Except I don't think it, so if I understand, Julie, help me out here, I don't think it will because our ends are so small for free and reduced lunch, by default, those numbers will be cell sizes lower than 10, and therefore MVE would not.
Would that always be the case though, that the N would be fewer than 10? I'm saying like, if that is the case now, like, that's great, but if it's not, and we don't catch it, that's not gonna be super awesome.
We can confirm that. Yeah. Yep. Anything else on that? Okay, so this, another one in academic progress. Students maintaining or moving toward proficiency. I don't think there's anything new here.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Same question.
Another one with academic progress. And again, with comparable schools, so we need to, we won't get bogged down here, but this is the same issue that we have to determine in conversation with our authorizer. Academic progress for reading and math. This is Fastbridge. Our students in grades 3 to 8 performing at or above target levels as measured by our standardized assessments, which here is Fastbridge. So we have 40 percentile for reading and at or above the national median for math. Metrics.
Did you discuss that with Dean Noy, whether it would be 30% or 40%?
Yeah, I'm nearly 100% certain it's.
Okay.
So this is about adequate substantial gains over time on Fastbridge, reading and math. And this is a totally different category. This is discipline. So there we have 3 options to choose from. And this is the one that we landed on. And I left in the edits we did here. And I have some interesting updates after talking to the academic team. So there's a bunch of different ways on which we can be measured in relation to discipline. The first one was time out of class, time spent out of instruction. And the academic team was definitely not in support of that one because we don't set a timer when somebody comes into a dean's office or the executive director's office. And that would be very difficult to measure, not to mention the fact that it doesn't capture times when a student, as we pointed out in our board retreat, the same student might come back more than once. So it makes it difficult to track.
Well, it was strange how they were tracking it because it was % students missing class.
Yeah, versus amount of time, even though that's what the metric said. So
Right.
we rejected that one. And the third one was very complex. It had multiple layers of things, and it was just very complex. So we landed on this one. What they had proposed was that we're looking at eliminating disparities between students of colors and white students. And the original wording was students suspended or expelled. And that we're looking at a rate we want to meet the standard we would want the rate of expulsion and suspension to be more or less the same. What the term here is approximately the same for white students and students of color. So that would be the goal, right? So we have changed the wording here to be a DERS reportable incident. Totally blanking on what that acronym stands for, disciplinary incident, something, I can look it up in a second, but I'm not sure we need to, we'll probably leave it here, but DERS reportable incidents are school suspensions, school expulsions, and weapons incidents. So they're essentially the same thing as what was here, but it includes weapons incidents, which we have never had in the recent past, maybe ever. So it's okay to leave it at DERS reportable incident. It's actually a little broader than just suspensions and expulsions. We do have some in-school suspensions. We occasionally have out-of-school suspensions. We have not this year had a single expulsion. So it's a category that's not super meaningful, but the academic team still really felt like we want to have our feet held to the fire, was the term that came up in the meeting, to make sure that even for the few that we have, that implicit bias is not at play, that other factors are not at play.
So at the retreat, we talked about perhaps doing yellow and green sheets.
Those are so voluminous. This is what the academic team came up with. There are so many of those.
Mhm.
And race can be a factor that's tracked in there. But that they determined that's a TCGIS specific tool.
Mhm.
And they felt like this one would be more meaningful to an outside body. So we do green and yellow sheets, but other schools have other things that they do. So we can continue to track, for example, how race might play a role in green and yellow sheets, but that's probably not how we want to have it reflected here on this form. So the academic team felt good with this.
Okay. Director Hyde.
Are in-school suspensions DERS reportable? Or
Are
is
they
it-
what?
Are the in-school suspensions the DERS reportable, or is it just out-of-school suspensions?
I think so. Not 100%, but I'm pretty sure in-school suspensions are included.
All right, and then can we assume that approximately the same percent is less than 5%?
Yes.
Got it, thank you.
Exceed standards is not applicable here because if it's less than 5%, then.
Yep.
Okay. So for teacher retention, we have traditionally been measured only on the retention of teachers overall. We proposed adding this year non-probationary teachers, having a separate metric for non-probationary teachers, for retention of non-probationary teachers. The academic team suggests removing this. Julie and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, but Ashley pulled the numbers from last year and she said this metric would not help us. Last year, we lost more non-probationary teachers than probationary. So even it might be a good metric to sort of hope for, but she's not sure that it's something we want to propose. We don't have enough data maybe to know if it's something that would help us. So we're probably gonna.
So the proposal is to go back to the original metric.
So it would
Did
be,
our percentages change in here? Do you remember?
well, I didn't copy the whole thing, but there's a separate, I don't think they would change. But it would just be the one category instead of A and B, it would just be A and it wouldn't be average then.
Could you, so I'm really curious what HR could summarize as the main reasons teachers depart the school. And if there could be a presentation on that. At a
On the main
future,
reasons why what?
teachers depart the school. I know they do exit interviews, so if we could get a summary of what the main themes are. I think that would be helpful.
Don't have a lot of teachers who would, right? But, yeah, and when do you want that
Talk about it later.
for the meeting? Parent satisfaction. Last year, it was just an overall satisfaction with the schools, or percentage of satisfaction with the school, and the authorizer suggested this year changing it to the percentage of parents surveyed who agree or strongly agree that they would recommend TCGIS to a friend. And we really like that, right? Because it incorporates overall satisfaction. If you are satisfied with the school, or if you would recommend the school to a friend, you wouldn't recommend, how should I say this? You would not recommend the school to a friend if you're not satisfied with it. So it just was, we like the wording a lot. And so this question will be on the parent survey. It hasn't been before. We like that. And then of course the survey response rate. If you look at the metric below, to meet the standard, we have to have between, sorry, that's supposed to be a dash, 31, between 31 and 35%. We exceed that. TCGIS families are great at participating in family survey, so I don't have any trouble.
Director Christensen, just to go back to the teacher retention question. To clear, you mentioned that we don't have many teachers leaving, but we have consistently not met the standard over the last several years. So we've been approaching standard. So that's where the board is interested in understanding
Yep. what's
going on there.
Yeah. Of course, as we've talked about, we know we because we have international teachers, some of whom come from the get-go on our limited contract, that always plays into it. Those teachers don't impact our numbers, but we're not sure. So let me put it this way, the authorizer wants us to exclude those teachers. When I talked to Ashley, she said she wasn't sure that she had excluded those teachers in the numbers that she had provided before. So our numbers may actually be better than they've shown up on the report. That makes sense?
Yeah, and the authorizer alluded to that too.
Yeah.
She thought that might have been the case.
Yeah.
And they've changed the wording here specifically to say of teachers who remain eligible to serve. So, and I don't think that wording was there before.
Yeah. So in the metrics below 1, 2, 3, and 4, where it says including retirements, it should say excluding retirements and teachers no longer eligible to serve, right?
Right.
So an example would be our set-up teacher who's here on a 2-year contract. And we can't change that. That is determined by the set-up. So when she's done, and her departure would not count against these numbers. When she leaves in 2 years.
Yeah. So it'd be great to see what our historical rates are based on this.
Yeah. Okay, so parent satisfaction, and then, so these are, what we looked at up until now are all goal areas that were on the previous contract, that where we were just tweaking the metrics, and what I'm going to show you now are all new proposed metrics for this coming contract.
Proposed by UST, the authorizer.
Proposed by the authorizer.
Yep.
Does the school have appropriate structures in place to effectively identify and support students needing academic accommodations, acceleration of remediation, mental health supports, and other supports in a timely fashion? This is an interesting and very broad question, right? Appropriate structures in place. So it's vague. So what's in red there is what we kind of talked about, what that might incorporate: communication with families, surveys to families, what they identify as meeting standard, and it looks like there's a blip in there. The school has systems to identify students needing supports, which work reliably and are used regularly by individuals throughout the system. Those people would be teachers, paraprofessionals, administrators, counselors, parents, etc. So that's one part of the metric. And when students are identified, the systems in place move efficiently, taking days or weeks as opposed to months or never, right, to execute the needed support. And then in regards to communication within systems is reliable, and internal, external stakeholders receive all necessary communications in a clear and timely fashion. So this is broad and tricky, right? Because there's 3 different things in there, right? That we have the supports, that they work efficiently, and that they're communicated efficiently. So we may do well in one area, not in another. So how they'll determine that we're meeting standard remains to be seen. This is, it's an important goal area. I'm not sure we're thrilled about how it's worded, just because it's pretty, those seem to me to be 3 separate things, but they're all incorporated into one. So, but it's fine. It gives us things to focus on. I don't know. They haven't really said how they'll measure it, but I think we can help shape how we'll be measured by it. Right. Yeah.
Is this in the one I looked at? I don't remember seeing this one.
Yeah.
This is the one we were on at the end of the retreat.
I don't know that we got that far. Yeah. Here's another new metric. There are opportunities and structures in place for families to engage in their child's education. To meet the standard, the school has a comprehensive plan to communicate academic performance and other pertinent school information with families, which is consistently executed with fidelity. That's part 1. The school has a formalized process to elicit feedback from students, part 2. And part 3, information is communicated to families in multiple languages. Tricky, right? The third one is tricky for us. And what the authorizer said is that for our purposes, there are schools in the large districts that have families from many different backgrounds. They engage a team, usually contracted team, and professional translators and interpreters. We use interpreters for various scenarios within the school, but we don't typically translate our materials. So one way that the authorizer said we could begin to do that would be with our recruitment materials in more than one language. We have a stated goal to diversify our student body. Maybe we need materials in Somali, for example, right? So that would be one. We don't have anything right now. We don't have any communications in other languages other than English. And so, you know, a next step would be having something in languages other than English. And so that's something we would need to focus on and think about. Again, we are required by law to provide, if a family, for example, doesn't speak English and they need to communicate with a teacher, we have to provide them with an interpreter, and we've needed to do that on various occasions. But in terms of written material, we don't have that. So this is this new metric also has lots of moving parts in it, right? So there are things that are good for us to think about. Makes me a little nervous to have such a big thing going on there that we're going to be measured by when there's lots of moving parts in there. But that's what's in there. But they did seem open to on the languages piece at least.
Yeah, what we proposed was perhaps we could survey families at the beginning of the year asking if they need communications in a different language and what language is it, and work on that.
So we haven't even done that before. It's possible, for example, that some of our families rely on other families in our community who speak their language. And we should be able to support them if needed. And then part B of this goal area is that, and we have to set the certain percentage of families and guardians participated in an engagement opportunity. So I don't think that was included in the last parent survey, was it?
The TCGIS parent survey?
Meaning,
I'm not sure.
Have you ever participated in anything? So I think we're going to include that this year so that we can measure it moving forward. And there are so many ways to engage: PTO, volunteer for a single event, being on the board, being in parent council, being an elder in contact, all these different things, coming to an event. And so that's part of engaging in your child's education, could be those sorts of opportunities they want us to pick a percentage that's meaningful. Yeah.
But also just like attending fall and spring conferences count as engagement.
Yep, absolutely.
Like that's like the most like engaging in the education. That's the most direct one, because then you're interacting with the teachers of your child. So
Is that something that can be recorded, participation in conferences by the school and not done through a survey?
Probably.
I think so. I think I've seen that statistic before.
Because it's on that, I'm sure that you can get a report off of that. whatever
The sign up.
Services.
It's a little tricky because there's never enough slots for all the parents, right? In
Yeah, that's true.
in conferences. So not participating in a conference doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to be engaged. So we have to work through that. But as you can see, these are they can be kind of overwhelming, right? They're getting at things that are important for the school. And so determining whether this is the best way to word them and to be measured by is interesting. There's just two more, bear with me. Is the school committed to anti-racism and equity by engaging in or providing the following? Representative and culturally relevant curriculum, specific staff board trainings on anti-racism, board and staff composition, opportunities for members of the school community to provide feedback on the school's diversity, equity, and inclusion practices and policies. So this is new this year. Great that it's there. But again, there's 4 components to it, right? To meet the standard, students, staff, and students, families of all backgrounds report that the school feels welcoming and accepting. So we have to determine how to elicit that information. Staff and board members regularly engage in cultural competency training, and equity is included in the school's strategic plan. Equity is certainly included in the school's strategic plan. We have a variety of cultural competency and anti-racism trainings on the staff. We talked about the board, how the board might be engaged in that and the ways in which it is. School routinely engages the school's broader community as evidenced by staff and board composition. And the school utilizes a curriculum that is not only representative of the students it serves, there shouldn't be an apostrophe there, it also represents a multitude of backgrounds and perspectives. So that's, as the Germans would say, that's an Eintopf approach, a stew, sort of like everything's thrown into the pot there. Lots of different things there that we might be doing well on some and need really to do work on others. So it's not quite clear to me how they might measure it if we're not doing well on all of them. I think all of those are really noble and important goals. There's just a lot included in the single metric there. So it's just worth noting that. And finally, is the school committed to creating a welcoming and inclusive environment that is open to all students? This is evidenced by the following. Marketing and outreach target socioeconomically and racially diverse populations. Materials are available in multiple languages. There is robust EL and SPED programming and enacting policies that reduce enrollment barriers. To meet that standard, the school's marketing strategy includes an actionable plan to recruit students from diverse backgrounds and are those who are low income. The plan is actively utilized. Materials are available in multiple languages. The school has robust EL and SPED programs. Additionally, school policies and practices are clear, transparent, and do not have negative impacts on low-income students or students of color. So I think we have work to do in our recruitment plan there. We don't typically have to do a lot of recruiting for kindergarten, right? But the point here is who knows about us? That's the point, right? Who knows about us? Who wants to come? Who wants to apply? Who wants to get in the lottery? And we could do better there. For sure.
I think Director Iwan started a recruiting plan that you can use.
Yeah, that one's interesting because of course we can't do, it's really about the, the marketing plan. So are we trying to reach these populations? Because we can't look at anything on the lottery application. So I think that's kind of interesting that they're just looking at what are you trying to do to reach these groups?
Yeah, so we don't have control over who gets in once their names are in the lottery, but are we encouraging a diverse group of families to enroll, to sign their students up for the lottery?
Yep.
And that is it from me. Thank you for bearing with me on that, for slogging through that. It is a lot. It's really important. One thing that our admin team talked about is the importance of, so we have our strategic plan milestones, and we have these authorizer goal areas. And so that we don't feel constantly just overwhelmed by them, we want to go through, and I'm sure the board would enjoy going, would do this with us in, finding out where they overlap, so that we can see the areas that we're already being really intentional about. And
then add some milestones,
add milestones as needed.
yeah, to make sure we meet them.
Yeah. Thanks for your patience through all of that and for all the good work with the board on these.
All right, so I don't think we're at a point where we can vote to approve them. So we'll
When,
just, they were hoping for them tomorrow or Monday. How about we shoot for Monday? Ultimately, the board will approve the final contract. So,
at the May meeting,
yep. We can discuss these again at committee of the whole. And there might be a few iterations between then.
so our
And now-
response on Monday doesn't have to be the last.
No.
Okay.
All right.
It's the next ping in the ping pong.
Yes.
Between us and the authorizers, and they've been really, really great.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to liaison updates. We'll do quick verbal updates from Director Linnell, Administrative Liaison.
Yeah, the two major things we talked about this past week are the parent survey. We got the timeline for that. It should be going out around the end of May, early June. We were hoping that it would be a little bit earlier, but that is the time frame. We provided some input on the questions that we wanted that would help us answer some of these authorizer questions. So that was very good. And I believe we're still waiting for the exact time frame for the organizational health survey, which the board helped draft last year, but it's been now will be administered by Ashley, and that goes out to all that work at TCGIS, and the board will receive data about that in a few months.
Sounds great. Any questions for Director Linnell? All right, Director Mueller, Parent
Yes.
Liaison.
Yes, a very short report from the parent liaison. The meeting was on April 11th. And actually, if you looked at the run brief from last week, the chair of the parent council, Kathleen Erdmann, wrote a summary about that and put that in the meeting. But I reported from our board meeting, highlighted some things, and one was that there are still some spring fundraisers planned because we need to reach our 110,000 that is in the school budget. I'm not exactly sure where we are today, but the other one was about a reminder about the event, and then also that we have 4 excellent candidates that are running for the board, and that announcement. And there were no parent letters or communication from parents. And Director Christensen also gave a report, which is like summarized in the, you can see in the work brief too.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Director Mueller? All right. Governance and Leadership Development Committee. Director Albers.
We are, like been mentioned, we are in the throes of getting ready for the election, so that's exciting. Otherwise, the year is starting to wind down. There's a few policies that'll get passed in May and in June, but otherwise there are, the way that it's set up is that we've already first read every policy that needs to be read in the year 2. So exciting to have completed that and further complete that in the next few months. So I would like to make a motion to approve 806 tonight, along with 521 and 401. 806 is the crisis management policy. 521 is the student disability non-discrimination policy. And 401 is equal employment opportunity policy. As a reminder, I asked earlier for the calendar policy, which is new to be postponed, as well as student medication.
Thank you, Director Albers. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Hyde. The motion on the table is to approve policy 806, 521, and 401. Are there questions or discussion?
I'd say not much has changed in any of these policies. Well, two of these policies, 521 and 401, are not recommended to have any changes. 806, I might let one of the people that focused on that, or I believe there are two of them tonight that might be able to help on that one, if they have anything to say.
So Director Hyde and Director Linnell worked on the crisis management policy edits.
All the edits that I focused on for this background, this policy is a policy that is written, essentially written by the state, is required to have, and they provide an example policy that you can just adopt. All the ones that we've adopted in the past, we've just taken it whole cloth. I just went through and removed anything that wasn't necessarily a part of the policy, but was a reference on how to implement the policy that would be more of a procedural administration task, just to take it out of the policy. Doesn't really change the meaning or what is defined in the policy at all.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the policy, say aye.
Objection.
Those opposed?
Objection. We can't do voice votes when we have a hybrid meeting. They have to be recorded votes to comply with open meeting law.
Thank you for that point of order, Director Linnell. All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Director Eberhard.
Aye.
Director Albers.
Aye.
Director Hyde.
Aye.
Director Linnell.
Aye.
Director Iwan.
Aye.
Director Bell.
Aye.
Director Mueller.
Aye.
Director Kutsenga.
Aye.
Director Alcatute. Aye. Motion carries.
Director Dayton is an aye too.
Oh, you're not on the screen.
No, my computer died.
You're in real life.
Yeah.
Director Dayton.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. All right. Finance and Facilities Committee. Director Hyde, did you update the report to reflect what the actual deficit is?
I did. And
Projected.
the last time I saw your comment, I went through and updated it on my rolling agenda, not the board packet.
Got it.
And Yulia must have grabbed it prior to that. But it's updated now.
So what is the projected deficit?
27. So it's gone, it's 17 more than was reported at our last meeting, which was February, but down 14 or 13 something from originally reported with the March numbers.
Mhm.
And that was due to just reanalyzing where we are at in our working budget.
How did those two new students who just enrolled, Julie's neighbors, how does that impact the deficit?
You can join us in a few weeks to see if those numbers are reflected in there, but it would be too early for any of that to be a part of the February or March numbers, which we went over at the meeting.
But I
mean,
think
do you-
I don't think it'll change much though, because we had 2 students just recently withdraw. And then we added 2 new students, so kind of staying the same.
So we reviewed the February and March numbers as we didn't have a March finance meeting. Cash on hand for February was 106, 103 for March, and which keeps us above our target goal. And we're using a current enrollment of 600. At the meeting, we also reviewed the preliminary budget for next year, which we will do again at our May meeting, and we'll potentially have something for review at the next committee of the whole meeting, and then passing in June at the June board meeting. Any
good.
questions?
All right, thank you, Treasurer Hyde. Diversity and Belonging Committee.
Yeah, so our committee met to discuss organizing events around diversity and belonging and inclusion. We concluded that this school year we would not, it was not feasible to plan anything because six weeks from now, the school year will be over. But we gathered some ideas for the end of the school year picnic, diversify that a little bit. And we brainstormed ideas for potential events for the next school year. And also we concluded to not plan anything else because this school year we've had already beyond the 3 events around diversity that we have as a milestone currently.
Just some follow-up communication after the ideas were shared about the picnic. You know, in the past, we've had parents attending the picnic. Last year was the first year we didn't have parents because of COVID. And my understanding is that now it'll continue as just children because they found it was really logistically better to have the kids going in shifts and then coming back to school instead of having all the kids there all at once. So there's a shift thing planned. And without parents there, it's probably not likely that we can do the henna tattoos because henna lasts a while and we would like parent approval for that. So we'll have to save that, I think, for another event. But yeah, moving forward, I think the committee was open to looking into diversifying it with some different games and foods and that sort of thing. Any questions for our chair of the Diversity and Belonging Committee? All right, thank you. Fundraising Committee, Director Bell. How are we doing?
There, sorry. So just a quick update. I don't have the actual current total after the book fair and everything, but I still think that we're probably around 22, 23 shy of our goal. So we have started our spring fundraising push, which is going to be tribute gifts, which we've already started. And we are also going to just go out with our regular appeals, asking to help make our annual fund goal. So we have a meeting on this Tuesday, which wasn't planned. It's not one of the every other month ones, but we have this meeting planned to talk about what we're going to do for the next remaining weeks to try to close that gap. So that is essentially where we're at. We're hopeful, I'm hopeful that we can still close that gap with a concerted push in the next few weeks. We made our goal last year, and I would hope that we can make our goal this year. And Kirsten Reich is sitting there, and I'm sure she's going to come with lots of great ideas to our meeting on Tuesday, and has been really instrumental in everything that she's helped us with so far this year and before. So I don't know, Kirsten, since you're here, if you have anything you'd like to add.
I don't at the time, but I do
Okay.
think that we'll put together a comprehensive campaign that can help us close the last little bit that we need to reach our goal.
Yeah, exactly. So
Sounds great.
that's pretty much where we're at.
All right, thank you, Director Bell. Communication and Outreach Committee.
Yeah, the news is the branding committee has finished kind of shopping around, giving the presentation on the 3 potential logo redesigns. We are going to meet in May, probably May 13th. I'll send out, get that on the calendar when it's finalized. And then I'll bring the results of that discussion to committee on the whole in May 18th, and we'll vote on it at the May meeting. So things are moving forward a little slower than I want, but it's great work. So I'm very proud of the volunteers.
That's awesome. Do you know if they were able to get student feedback?
I think so. I think they got some student feedback somehow. I don't know, the email or something.
Okay, we'll hear about it more. Any other questions for Director Iwan? All right, Director Linnell, Mission and School Culture. Can you give a verbal update?
Yeah, very briefly, we didn't meet this month, but I'll give 3 brief updates from the committee. Next month will be 2 of our subcommittees. Curriculum Advisory Committee is meeting, Esther Noy chairs that, which will be on the 10th. SEAC, the Special Education Advisory Committee, which is new to Mission and School Culture, will be meeting next month at a date and time TBD. That will have tri-chairs, but primarily led by our Director of Special Education, Mandy Kasowitz. And third, a project that comes out of Mission and School Culture is the summer project of our community garden. Some of us met earlier this week to make plans for that. We think we will not be able to plant until around the first weekend of June because of how cold it's been, but we do have plans in place. We are going to be soliciting volunteers to get the garden up and running, and then a schedule for the summer will be coming out. So please watch for that.
Very fun. Any questions for Director Linnell?
Where's the harvest from that garden go?
The harvest from the garden, we donate it to Keystone Community Center. It's in St. Paul off of University Avenue.
And one fun addition to the garden this summer is we talked about how we can grow potatoes in pots, because that is one food that Keystone told us they always need more of. So we are trying to make that happen per their request.
Can you repeat that? Potatoes in
Pots.
Pots. Yep, it's something that Stacy Flanagan, who is a teacher, helped, or an educator, helped at a project at her preschool. And I can send around a little short video about how that works. But we will have 2 or 3 large pots that will sit in the corners of the garden. So it'll help grow potatoes, also provide some demarcation of our plot. And then we should be able to harvest those and donate those in the fall to Keystone.
Yeah, if you can send that out, that'd be great. I'm curious, but I won't take up everybody's time right now.
It's a
Requesting
pretty cool thing.
explanation.
So I'll post it.
Yes. Thank you, Director Linnell. Last item on the agenda is the board retreat. Since we were all there, don't think we need to discuss it. I guess, is there anything from the retreat you would like to follow up on in more depth at the committee of the whole meeting?
Aside from our authorizer metrics.
Aside from the authorizer metrics. We did record the presentation that Tim Ian gave about sustainable building practices. And so I'll be sending that recording out to our members of the campus planning committee so that everybody can hear that, as we're hoping it'll inform some of the direction that we take in our campus planning with the charter. Dr. Mueller?
Yeah, I just want to follow up, like, so what, you said you will send out the recording for them to look it up, but is there like already, like, will they discuss it too? I mean, is there, or, I mean.
Yeah, so some of the members attended that day. And then I think there's a meeting set up for a tour of the school
It's next week.
Next week.
next week. Yeah. So I don't know if there's time during that meeting to discuss it, but the plan was, actually, we had planned at the retreat to go through the charter and we didn't do that. So that would be a discussion that Dr. Christensen sets up with Ashley to finalize the charter. Mhm. All right.
I almost don't want to bring it up because I don't have a fully formed thought on it. But will the transfer of memory exhibit be still here at the community of the whole meeting, or will it be
When is the committee of the whole?
May 18th?
May 18th? No, it's coming down on the 15th.
Okay,
Or the
that's what I thought.
13th, sorry, or the 13th, yeah.
Okay, just at the meeting, I think if we just put a little bit of time on the agenda for some sort of reflection or recap of it, I think it'd be great for all of us to, we kind of opened it with our retreat on Saturday, and if we can kind of close it.
Lovely. We've had a lot of student engagement with it, and I can talk to the teachers. Some of the things that their students have written or shared about it.
Mhm. Sounds good. Thanks for the suggestion. All right. Is there any new business? Hearing none, I make a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
I'll second.
Thank you. I'll ask for unanimous consent. I can do that, right? Director Linnell?
I think on a motion to adjourn, you can.
Okay. Any objections? We are adjourned. Thank you. Thanks for attending remotely, you guys. Have a good evening.